Join us on Patreon and become part of our journey to uncover history's untold stories. Your support helps us create in-depth content, bring hidden narratives to life, and keep history alive for everyone.
History, as it is often presented, is a curated collection of narratives shaped by those in power to fit a particular perspective. While many Americans are familiar with the struggles of Native Americans and the brutal legacy of African enslavement, a lesser-known story remains buried beneath layers of governmental omission and deliberate historical distortion: the story of Black natives. The intertwining histories of African-descended peoples and indigenous tribes in North America stretch back centuries, forming a complex and rich heritage that has been systematically erased, suppressed, and rewritten. This is not a case of mere oversight, but of active historical revisionism. The U.S. government, through its policies, institutions, and census classifications, has played a significant role in diminishing the recognition of Black natives. From the forced reclassification of racial identities to the legal maneuvers that stripped Black native descendants of their tribal affiliations, the state has consistently sought to fragment and obscure these identities. The goal was twofold: to deny African Americans the sovereignty and land rights that could be inherited through Native ancestry, and to further the erasure of indigenous peoples from the American landscape. To fully grasp the extent of this erasure, we must journey through the early encounters between Africans and indigenous Americans, explore the shared struggles they faced under European colonization, and examine the legal and bureaucratic tactics employed by the U.S. government to sever their historical ties. Long before the formation of the United States, the histories of African-descended peoples and Native Americans were already deeply entangled. Some historians argue that African presence in the Americas predates European contact, citing evidence of pre-Columbian trade networks between West Africa and indigenous civilizations in the Americas. However, the most well-documented interactions between Africans and Native Americans occurred during the colonial period, when both groups found themselves subjugated by European powers. When the transatlantic slave trade brought enslaved Africans to North America, many found refuge among Native American tribes. Some escaped from bondage and integrated into indigenous communities, while others were adopted through alliances formed between certain tribes and African-run maroon societies. In many cases, these interactions were built on mutual resistance against European domination. For example, the Seminole Nation of Florida became a well-known haven for escaped African slaves who intermarried with the tribe and fought alongside them in wars against the United States. The Black Seminoles, as they came to be known, played a critical role in the Seminole Wars, resisting U.S. military campaigns aimed at forcibly relocating Native peoples. Other tribes, such as the Cherokee, Creek, and Chickasaw, also had significant Black populations, some of whom were enslaved by tribal elites, while others were fully integrated as community members. As the United States expanded its territories, the government introduced legal measures designed to erase or reclassify Black Native populations. One of the most insidious tools of this erasure was the U.S. Census, which systematically miscategorized individuals to fit a binary racial model that excluded mixed identities. In the 19th and 20th centuries, many Black natives were classified solely as Black, stripping them of their indigenous heritage in official records. This process was intentional, as it allowed the government to deny land allotments, tribal citizenship, and other rights that Native ancestry might have conferred. The Dawes Act of 1887 furthered this erasure by restructuring tribal land ownership. Under the guise of assimilating Native Americans into American society, the Dawes Act broke up communal lands into individual allotments, which were then distributed to those classified as Native American. Many Black natives were excluded from receiving land, even if they had long been part of tribal communities. Additionally, tribal roles, used to determine who was considered a member of a given Native nation, were often manipulated to exclude those of African descent, even if they had historically been recognized by the tribe. Perhaps one of the most blatant examples of this erasure came with the 1898 Curtis Act, which further undermined tribal sovereignty and excluded Black natives from legal recognition. This act forced tribes to adopt blood quantum requirements, a controversial system that classified individuals based on the percentage of Native ancestry they possessed. This system disproportionately affected Black natives, as any African ancestry was used to disqualify them from tribal enrollment, a practice that was heavily influenced by the anti-black racism of the time. One of the most enduring struggles of black natives has been the fight for recognition within the so-called five civilized tribes: the Cherokee, Chickasaw, Choctaw, Creek, and Seminole nations. Many black people were enslaved by these tribes before the Civil War, and following the war, the U.S. government pressured these tribes to sign treaties granting citizenship to their formerly enslaved members, known as the freedmen. However, in the decades that followed, these tribes, many of which had adopted the racial attitudes of their southern neighbors, began efforts to expel black members. By the 20th century, many freedmen and their descendants found themselves stripped of their tribal status, land rights, and access to resources. The Cherokee Nation, for instance, engaged in repeated legal battles over the status of its freedmen, culminating in a landmark case in 2017, when a federal court ruled that Cherokee freedmen were entitled to full tribal citizenship. The U.S. government played a key role in encouraging native tribes to distance themselves from their black members. Federal policies, such as the Indian Reorganization Act of 1934, reinforced the use of blood quantum as a means of determining tribal membership, further marginalizing black natives. Additionally, boarding schools designed to assimilate native children into white society often reinforced anti-black attitudes, discouraging any acknowledgement of African ancestry. Throughout the 20th century, the Bureau of Indian Affairs and other governmental institutions continued to promote policies that privilege those with pure native ancestry, disregarding the complex, mixed-race histories of many indigenous peoples. This deliberate exclusion ensured that black natives remained invisible in both African American and Native American historical narratives. The erasure of black native histories is not a matter of forgotten stories, but of deliberate governmental actions designed to sever the ties between African-descended peoples and indigenous communities. Through legal maneuvers, racial classifications, and policies rooted in anti-blackness, the U.S. government has systematically worked to erase this shared history. However, despite these efforts, black native communities continue to fight for recognition, reclaiming their heritage and challenging the forces that seek to erase them. Understanding this history is crucial, not just for those of black native descent, but for all who seek a more truthful and inclusive account of America's past. The story of black natives is one of resilience, resistance, and survival, a testament to the enduring strength of those who refuse to be written out of history.